This is Audible.
Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Chilling Reflections by Drew Hayes, narrated by Amy Landon. Prologue. On the charred remains of a world long ago fallen, a single being puttered about. VRX-77 moved swiftly, walking through the carefully constructed compound to the alarm annoyingly beeping in every room. Gleaming silver walls were a stark contrast to the burning red sky and roasted brown dust that lay outside, a barren wasteland where nothing thrived. VRX-77's own body was a similar hue, a sleek silver form with hints of ruby woven throughout. Its heavy steps were soundless, however, muffled by one of the multitude of internal devices active at all times. Quieter footsteps were merely one small aspect, a drop in the bucket compared to the chronoflow disruptor, spatial relocator, multi-layer energy barriers, and the nigh-endless array of offensive weapons at its disposal. Still, for a metal being living in a metal compound, the clanging from each step was almost inescapable otherwise. So one might argue VRX-77 gained more benefit from the reduced audio annoyance than its more advanced features. Of course, that didn't help much when that infernal beeping wouldn't stop. VRX-77 had no one else to blame. It had created the noise itself, purposely chosen to be as grating as possible. When centering the majority of its attention on a project, external stimuli were often ignored, so a sound that was impossible to ignore had been necessary for this particular alarm. No matter what other project might be at hand, this was a notice VRX-77 always wanted to catch. Arriving at the heart of the compound, VRX-77 stood before a massive wall of monitors and tapped a single button on a waiting keyboard. With that single motion, the alarm cut off at last. What arose in its place was a cavalcade of images, data, and other tidbits cycling through the dozen-plus screens that were now active. VRX-77 studied them carefully, occasionally tapping another button to pause at a particular frame of information. The automated detection algorithm was working as intended. All signs were indeed present. In one of the technically endless sections of the multiverse, a dimensional nova was building. Judging by the readings, there were perhaps a handful of days in the adjacent universes before it erupted. Running a gleaming hand over the keyboard, VRX-77 began to type more dutifully. New scans activated, searching the innumerable worlds contained within the range of the dimensional nova. Worlds without meta-capable beings were eliminated first, as those were guaranteed not to have what was needed. Next went the ones without the precise combination of elements required. After that, the parameters grew more circumstantial, zeroing in on minute factors to determine the likelihood of a match. The first world clocked in at a dismal 20%, but VRX-77 still noted it in case that was the best option. The second showed a slightly more encouraging 34%, which remained the frontrunner, until VRX-77 found a world with a 60% match for the target. 60% was high enough that VRX-77 nearly locked the coordinates then and there. However, experience had taught the importance of thoroughness. Methodically, it continued to check each viable world, though it was purely formality. 60% was the best reading it had gotten in the last dozen expeditions. When a new number appeared on screen, VRX-77 stopped typing momentarily, staring in dumbfounded shock. 97%! There was a world in range of the dimensional nova with a 97% match? Suddenly the silver hands were flying once more, digging deeper into the data. Fate was never so kind. For a reading that good, there had to be a catch. There was. Leaning back from the keyboard, VRX-77 stared at the one factor it always took great pains to avoid: a lodestar. Their presence made getting in hard enough, though the dimensional nova would handle the heavy lifting in this case. The trouble was moving around in a world that a lodestar protected. Even when VRX-77 used a dimensional synchronizer, lodestars could sense dimensional interlopers, and they were always strong enough to be a threat. That was why VRX-77 avoided the lodestar dimensions as much as possible. But for 97%, that was too high. VRX-77 couldn't ignore the opportunity, even if it did come with considerable risk. Luckily, there was still time to prepare. By customizing its devices to be as stealth-oriented as possible, it might be viable to stay off Lodestar's radar. just long enough to get the job done and escape. In the shining compound resting atop a dead world, a flurry of activity began. There were only days to prepare, and VRX-77 intended to be as ready as possible. For a chance this good, it had to get things right this time. The crackle of fire from the burning sconces cast strange shadows over the man with kaleidoscope eyes. Yet his curious eyes were barely noticeable next to the enormous cerulean serpent sharing the same chamber. Its body wove to and fro in a downright impossible arrangement that appeared to go on forever. Scary as its massive jaws were, those with guile took quick note of the intelligence shining in its eyes. That was the true threat it posed. And yet, this towering monster inclined its head to the simple man in a dirty overcoat. A modest bow, but one all the same. When it spoke, the voice did not echo with the force its size would indicate. "The offerings have been made. The arrangement has been honored. Will you pass along the message?" Silence stretched between them, as potentially endless as the serpent's body, until it was snuffed out. "Very well." Beneath the kaleidoscope eyes, a twisted smile took shape, one that spoke clearly to its owner's madness. "This has the potential to be very entertaining indeed. The nova will burst in 4 days for their world. I suggest you be ready." Then he was gone, as if edited out of reality. Alone in the stone chamber, the enormous serpent let out a small breath of relief. While the serpent didn't fear the madman who called himself Nexus, there was no guarantee he would play along with the request. Nexus was self-serving, but that wasn't an entirely negative trait. By finding a way to ensure the gambit offered something Nexus wanted to watch, the serpent ensured he would be properly motivated to see the task through. Knowing 4 days in the other world would be considerably more for him, the serpent still hurried to get to work. Now that he was sure a guest would be coming, it was important to set a proper welcome, especially for someone this renowned. Besides, he had to make the visit count. If all went to plan, it would be the last one they ever shared. There was no staff in the bar. They'd stopped showing up shortly after the Rexren invasion, and Grantham never cared enough to try to track them down. Every morning when he arrived, the coolers had been refilled, food prepped and left in the kitchen fridge, and repairs were made to whatever he'd broken last. So Grantham sat in the bar alone, day after day, a child sipping down beer after unwilling frosty beer, watching the world through a battered television mounted in the corner. Some might have said all he'd really done in escaping Rookstone was trade one prison cell for another. Those people were fucking idiots, so far as Grantham was concerned. Prison didn't have beer, sunshine, and a tropical beach within jogging distance. Jogging distance for him, anyway. Then again, prison also didn't have annoying pests trying to drag him into their schemes. Because today, Grantham wasn't alone in his bar. Seated across the booth was a mundane-looking man in a simple black suit. The bowler hat and spectacles were his most distinguishing features, aside from his criminal record. The man possessed a power that could turn the tables on many a meta, cape or villain alike, and as such was usually treated with a degree of fearful respect. "Would you get to the goddamn point, Bird?" Grantham interrupted, not even having listened to the last 5 minutes of drivel. "I let you keep your head despite walking in here uninvited, but professional courtesy only goes so far. We're 5 minutes from Pick That Door, and I'm not missing my favorite game show." "Of course." Bert showed little reaction to the disrespect, though Grantham imagined things would go differently against another meta. "I was just conveying that my sources tell me a major dimensional event will be occurring soon, one that will temporarily create opportunities that might not normally exist. I have put together a plan that makes use of the chance to facilitate—" "This can't be you getting to the point." Bert took a long breath, forced a smile on his face, wavering. "Apologies. I suppose at its core what I am here offering you is a chance for revenge." For the first time since Bert entered, Grantham shifted his full attention away from the television screen. "Revenge?
We were both stuffed in that hole for over a decade. Who the hell am I supposed to be going after? Because if it's the one who put me there, I may as well just walk back in myself."
In response, Bert produced a photograph from his suit jacket pocket. Sliding it across the table, he said nothing, allowing Grantham to draw his own conclusions. The picture itself was of a headless body, far from the first Grantham had witnessed, but the sight still gave him pause. Between the green hands, the strange shape, and the purple overcoat, it was impossible not to recognize that body.
"Somebody killed Lazora? Word is it was done by one of the guild's newer members, a rookie going by Hephaestus."
Bert maintained a neutral tone, even as the undeniable hints of a smirk tugged at his cheeks.
"Perhaps now you see why I thought it wise to reach out. I would hardly deny one of your stature the chance to avenge a friend."
Grantham stared at the photograph, the blood pooling near the stump, the sharp glint of light against her claws. It seemed like yesterday she was in here, pitching some scheme herself. But that had been before the Rexren invasion, which meant several months had passed since he last saw Lazora. Now, he never would again.
"And what is it you would need from Jokul, exactly?"
The tugging smirk threatened to fully manifest at those words, but Bert wisely denied it.
"A distraction, when the time is right. Nothing more than that."
To trust Bert, one had to either be naive or stupid. Grantham was neither, yet he found himself interested all the same. There would be some manner of trickery afoot. With Bert, the schemes were unavoidable. But if it gave him the chance to see something he wanted, that was fine. If Bert became a real problem, Jokul would simply tear off his limbs. No one ever had much fight left in them after that. Hephaestus Metasuit, version 2. Basic functionality test commencing. Tori's words would activate the recording function in her laboratory's cameras, one of the many perks of not working in a concrete bunker intended as a parking spot. In the months since Ivan first booked her more advanced lab space at the Guild's headquarters, Tori had made ample use of the accommodations, the tremendous majority of her efforts going into the project currently wrapped around her semi-incorporeal body. Fueled from the torrent of heat created by Tori turning into living fire, composed of a material mimicking the body of a nigh-indestructible meta, and crammed with every upgrade the electrical system could support, she had officially completed the second version of her Hephaestus metasuit. Unlike her first design, which was effectively a prototype banged into working order piece by piece, this represented a step forward from the initial proof of concept. Tori had established that she could create a metasuit. The next step was building one strong enough to suit her needs. Between losing fights with capes and being rendered ineffectual against the asshole who invaded their apartment during the Rexren invasions, Tori was just about fed up with feeling underpowered. A brief flash from her trip to Hollowville flitted through her mind, along with memories of what it was like to wield a fraction of Ivan's power. It would be a lie to say her ambitions didn't reach such heights, but Tori was at least sensible enough to realize just how far she was from reaching them. There was a lot of ground to cover between her current abilities and even that taste of real power she'd experienced. The new metasuit would hopefully narrow that gap. Tori walked around her lab, feeling the suit's motors react to the guidance of her heat. Navigating in fire form had taken a fair bit of practice and fine-tuning, but there was no getting around the superior heat output and higher degree of safety. With her new suit's upgraded sensors, the experience was far smoother, her movements no longer seeming so jerky and robotic. Activating the dozens of small gravity distortion devices embedded across the suit, Tori felt its weight lighten, her movements becoming even easier. Unlike her last suit, this version now had 3 of the full-size gravity distorters, as her influx of income made it possible to finally build more. On top of allowing for easier, smoother flight, Tori could now carry other people. Not for long, and it was a massive drain on power, but if push came to shove, she wouldn't have to leave a friend in the lurch. Activating flight function. Tori rose from the ground as a carefully contained stream of fire shot from her back, lifting her gracefully into the air. As she had with walking, she found aerial movement far easier thanks to the system upgrades. Her suit hung in the air above her workstation like a floating void, the dark material reflecting as little light as it could manage. It felt somewhat fitting, given whose finger she'd derived the compound from. A few flares of red light flashed along the suit. These were capable of turning off when secrecy was needed, but Tori had decided the splash of color was a nice aesthetic touch. The design helped connect her two suits, forming a sense of continuity. While she was planning to keep developing and growing her equipment, Tori would forever think fondly of that first functional suit. It was a foundation on top of which future successes would be built. Settling down in front of a pre-calibrated laser cannon, Tori mentally readied herself. There was always something tough about letting herself get shot, even when she should be perfectly safe. Durability test. Engaging. With a remote signal from her own suit, the cannon fired, blasting Tori in the sternum with a beam roughly 50% of the maximum power she could currently generate. The flash of energy would have seared her eyes, had she possessed any at the moment. Her helm's cameras were unbothered by the bright light, just as her torso was unsinged by the focused beam. She scanned it with every type of camera the helm had, just to be sure, but the results were consistent. No discernible damage, despite the intensity of the attack. The metal shell holding was more or less a given at these power levels. More impressive was that her internal systems didn't register so much as a blip. The suit's new material was proving to insulate against damage, as well as standing up to a ton of it. Around a year ago, Tori would have said she'd trade anything for an upgrade like this. But that had been before taking a job to rob the wrong vault, before joining a guild of villains who did things with longevity in mind, before making friends with capes and crooks alike. More importantly, it had been before a cape named Ike teleported himself into deep space, saving Tori and his friends, willingly paying the ultimate price. Tori wouldn't have traded a friend's life for more power. That was something she knew now, having had the bargain forced upon her. But she also wasn't willing to abandon a useful tool out of misplaced sentimentality. They'd lost Ike because none of them was strong enough to win the fight any other way. Tori could think of no better way to honor his memory than making sure next time trouble came to call, Hephaestus was able to send it screaming into the night. Chapter 1. The day of the dimensional nova's eruption, Tori Rivas was not at work. Had she been at the Indigo Technologies facility where her line of self-defense equipment was being refined, Tori would have been locked away behind dozens of shields and fail-safe devices. Were she at her true lab on the Guild's Volcano Island headquarters, Tori would have been even safer, protected by the highest degree of defenses an entire legion of supervillains could devise. Instead, on the morning such a dire event was fated to transpire, Tori was bouncing along in a borrowed van that bore the logo of Ridge City Grinders along its side. Chloe was driving, as it was from her work the vehicle had been loaned, with Beverly seated in a passenger seat, helping to navigate. For her part, Tori had a job she was taking very seriously. Tori Rivas was sulking. "This is such a waste of time." Her words drew a loud groan from Beverly, who turned around in her seat. "For the umpteenth time, you have got to get some new work clothes. Next month, they're going to have you start doing more appearances in meetings, eventually working up toward doing press stuff again." "What's wrong with the outfits from our own supplier?" Tori favored the clothing made through their guild, predominantly because it was made from metamaterials, able to change form into fire with her. Although she developed her own, they were never quite as soft or durable as what the guild produced. Not to mention, she'd grown to enjoy a tailored fit. "The problem is, you don't make buy everything bespoke money yet. And even if you did, sooner or later someone will talk to you and realize there is no way you would spend what that sort of wardrobe costs on mere clothes." Beverly pointed to Tori's current ensemble, a t-shirt and jeans, both stained with oil, the latter sporting several holes along the cuffs. "That's why we're going to the outlet shops at the edge of town. Factory reject pricing is the only believable way you'd pay for a designer label." "I'm excited to spruce up my outfits, too," Chloe added. "Spring's just around the corner. My closet could use some lighter weather wear." Tori leaned back, accepting her defeat for the moment. It was 2 against 1, really 3, if she wanted to count her own judgment. This was something she needed to do. The idea just held zero appeal for her. Adding friends to the mix would hopefully make the experience somewhat enjoyable, though Tori had added a bit of a bribe to push her motivation over the edge. In the back of the van rested an unassuming black case, within which lay Tori's new Hephaestus armor. The case was made from her extra durable metal, only with a plastic coating on top to hide the telltale dark hue. She'd worked in several of the smaller gravity distortion devices, making the suit's heft easily haulable. Not far from where the outlet shop sat, there was a large canyon that went on for several miles. The perfect sort of isolated spot where Tori could give her new suit's flight functions a test run in the outside world. Soaring through the sky in her freshly built suit was the treat waiting for her at the end of shopping's ordeal. Next to the case rested a gray duffel bag with Beverly's Bahamut costume stowed haphazardly away. That one was brought along for when you get into trouble, though Tori suspected the true motivation was a chance to get some flying in. Being metahumans wasn't always easy, and the life it had led several of them to was actively dangerous. But with those losses came the trade-off of experiences a normal person could never have. Flying was absolutely among the best of those experiences, and Tori didn't blame her friend for fitting in some sky time when able. Technically, they could have booked transport to a remote location through guild assets like tunnel vision, but the cost of that sort of travel added up quickly. Flitting her gaze up to the rearview mirror, Tori's eyes narrowed. That same sedan has been keeping pace with us for the last 15 minutes or so. Well, it's a highway. There's only one direction, and we are all going about the same speed, Chloe pointed out. No. You two are going the same speed. Everyone else is doing at least 5 miles over. Tori scooted forward, poking her head toward the dash and confirming that Chloe was indeed locked in at the speed limit. She looked a bit sheepish, though made no effort to increase their speed. I can't risk getting pulled over. What if they search the van and find that stuff you brought? We appreciate the concern, but you don't need to worry that much, Beverly replied. My stuff just looks like random costume pieces at most, workout equipment if I sell it right. And I'm sure Tori built some sort of false latch system, so the box opens to mundane contents when the wrong person tries to open it. Beverly turned around for confirmation, only to blanch at the embarrassed expression on Tori's face. You did put in some sort of failsafe, right? Maybe it's best if Chloe just sticks to her current speed. In her mind, Tori made a note to add something like Beverly's suggestion. It was an excellent idea if she wanted to haul the suit around with her. Still doesn't explain why the other car is matching our pace. Most people don't need reasons to obey the law. Do you not see all the cars passing us? Tori jerked a thumb out the window just in time to see a massive SUV painted garish orange roar past, jerking to avoid collisions. Okay, Beverly conceded. Maybe they're hauling sketchy villain suits too, or maybe they just like following the rules. Tori summoned up her best scoff. What sort of square likes following the rules? Did you see that orange SUV? I'm half tempted to call them in for reckless driving. Austin had his hands at 10 at 2, mirrors carefully adjusted, and cruise control locked in at precisely the posted speed limit. For anyone accustomed to driving at more socially standardized speeds, the ride was frustrating. For his best friend Kyle, a metahuman gifted with superspeed, it was downright agonizing. Do you want me to get their plates? You don't even need to slow down. I can zip right out the door. Kyle was already reaching for the handle when a flash of light from the passenger seat forced him to pause. Elliot turned around to stare at him, a soft crackle of power visible in her eyes. Keep it planted right there, mister. If we let you out, you're going to zip ahead, do all the shopping you need to, and then whine about how bored you are for the rest of the trip. The seasons are changing. We need new clothes, and I'm excited to explore these outlet shops. Chloe said it's a whole outdoor complex, including several eateries. Are you bribing me? Kyle asked. If you'd rather keep pouting, we can skip the food and stick to shopping so we're done faster. Kyle folded his arms, then realized the optics and shook them out. I'm not pouting. I just feel like there are better ways we could be spending our time. From the driver's seat, Austin piped up. Respectfully, I have to disagree. We've been going hard these last few months. If we're not in the field, we're training. If not training, we're undertaking a side project like the trip to Hollowville. We barely even see our friends in the building where we live. Giving your all is important, but you can't do that if you're run too ragged. Recovery matters. So today we're just 3 normal friends doing some shopping. And eating, Kyle added. Shopping and eating. You don't need to sell me on it. I'm already peckish. Austin agreed. Silence fell as a sports car bolted past on their left. It was a strange experience, letting the quiet settle over them. For years, these moments would be filled with jabber from Ike, analyses of past fights, vulgar tales designed to make Austin squirm, flippant jokes, and startling insights. One never knew what would come from that man next. Ike had proven that to the very end, when the team was faced with a threat they simply could not overcome. A villain so strong that their collective efforts were barely able to manage a single injury on his hand. Yet of them all, Only he saw the way forward, despite the cost it demanded. Ike had teleported himself and their adversary into the cold clutches of deep space, paying the ultimate price to save his team, his friends. Tormented by that memory, how could Kyle do anything but throw himself into the job? If he'd been faster, mastered more super speed techniques, had some sort of ace in the hole, would there have been a way to save Ike? It was a question he could never answer, and one he was determined not to end up asking himself again. When the next Alfred settler attacked, Tachyon had to be ready, because Kyle wasn't sure if he had it in him to bury another friend. Nor was he prepared to let the silence fill in where Ike's prattle was missing. "All right, Ellie, lay the game plan on me. What shops are we hitting, and how many places out there sell food covered in melted cheese?" Shit! Ren jerked the wheel, narrowly avoiding a collision as he struggled to keep the borrowed vehicle under control. Driving had once been among his favorite ways to relax. Before the accident, he would cruise the highways to the outskirts of town, enjoying the passing scenery and soothing ride. So when the group decided to take a trip to the edge of town, it seemed like an excellent chance to rekindle an old passion. The trouble was that the Alliance of Heroic Champions only had so many vehicles available for their superheroes to check out. Were he proportional to a standard human, Ren would have had a fair selection of options. However, given his prodigious bulk as a living amalgamation of dozens of animals, there was only one vehicle suited for him to drive. Originally built for a superhero named Rocket Jock, the bright orange SUV was designed for someone of enhanced proportions, making it viable for Ren to pilot. The issue was that it had also been built with specs that intended more active use than daily driving demanded. At the slight touch of the accelerator, the car would shoot forward, and the hyper-responsive steering wheel only served to compound the problem. All of which catalyzed into a terribly harrowing ride for Ren and his 3 passengers. Donald Moss, the man who went by Cybergeek while acting in his capacity as a superhero, was in the passenger seat, face twisted in a mix of terror and exhilaration not unlike the expression he wore mid-combat. In the back, Irene had partially formed an armor of ice around her head and torso, demonstrating why her superhero moniker was Cold Shoulder. As for Lucy, who wasn't wearing the usual magical ensemble that identified Hat Trick, she had a deck of cards she was nervously shuffling. Ren himself had little to fear from a car crash. Despite the illusion conjured by the bangle on his wrist, he was always in his superhero form. Known as Medley, the array of stolen animal features woven through his genetics kept him safe from such mundane injuries. The others, however, were more vulnerable when unprepared, which was part of why he fought so hard to get the SUV under control. Mercifully, they drove under a large sign indicating that their destination was only a handful of exits away. After Austin had mentioned his team visiting outlet shops soon, Donald pitched the idea of heading out to do the same. Since his superhero identity wasn't a secret, Donald Moss, the person, was receiving more and more media recognition, some of which spilled over onto his social group. With all that attention, updating their wardrobes didn't seem like the worst idea, especially given how much training they'd all been doing. For the first time in his life, Donald had put on a bit of muscle, thus altering the way his shirts fit. Lucy had dropped a dress size, and though Irene generally hit it, she'd added a good bit of tone. Looking at his friend's growth, it was hard not to feel pangs of jealousy. As a former athlete, Ren had reveled in the power to reshape his body through effort alone. In his new form, it was hard to tell what efforts bore fruit, as nothing seemed to change. Training had revealed ways to improve his coordination, control, balance, and the like, but where raw strength was concerned, Ren showed minimal improvement. There was a growing fear in his chest that he'd already reached his limits, that this was the best he'd ever manage. It wasn't bad, he could certainly hold his own against a great deal of metas, but sooner or later his friends would outgrow him. Their powers were developing by the day, with so many potential ways to improve. Strong as he might be, Ren was nowhere near the top of that spectrum. If he couldn't find a way to keep pace, eventually he'd become nothing more than a liability to the people he cared for. Of course, if they all died in a fiery car crash, none of those concerns would matter. So Ren focused on his fight with the steering wheel, zipping between lanes as he desperately sought some manner of momentum equilibrium. Chapter 2. The grab-and-get outlet mall had a modest crowd enjoying the spike of warm weather. Families walked under the artificial palm trees that bloomed year-round. Couples went for strolls beneath the colorful umbrellas of the outdoor dining area, and a supervillain barely resisted the urge to burn down the store she was currently trapped in. More? Where are you finding these? The store isn't even that big. Tori swung her head around, theatrically scanning the admittedly limited surroundings of the store Beverly had selected. It was some fancy brand written in cursive too artistic to be legible, and given the prices she was seeing, Tori couldn't fathom what the non-outlet versions cost. You have to know where to look. From the pile she'd prepared, Beverly plucked a single purple blouse. Oh, Chloe, I found this for you. Looks like it would be a good fit. It's lovely. Chloe happily accepted the offering, while Tori scowled as she took the newest pile of clothes from Beverly. These would soon join the sizable pile she'd accrued in her dressing room. Of them, Tori would begrudgingly admit there were a few outfits that were neither uncomfortable nor too garish for her tastes. The cost was still hard to swallow, but with her metasuit finally out of development, she had disposable income once more. Shutting the curtain, Tori's gaze traveled from the pile of waiting outfits to the mirror reflecting her current selection. The face that stared back was undeniably surly, which was what Tori generally aimed for. Surly kept unwanted interactions to a minimum, not friendly enough to start a conversation, nor angry enough to cause a fight. At least she looked rested for a change, her brown hair pulled back in a tight ponytail rather than poking up haphazardly, no visible bags haunting the undersides of her eyes. Since she'd planned on taking her suit for a test, Tori forced herself to catch up on sleep. A tired brain and slow reflexes were not the welcome her newest creation deserved. It felt strange, seeing her face floating above a designer outfit, albeit one with manufacturing flaws, rather than a grease-stained shirt. But from the day she struck a bargain with Wade Wyatt, Tori had known that sooner or later she'd have to start working in the public eye. The last few months had been sold as time off to recover from her ordeals and develop her line of self-defense items. Just the purses had been doing incredible business. Wade made no secret that he was excited for the launch of the full line. A launch that would demand the creator and figurehead to be present. Both in the offices and out on tour, Tori would be making rounds, ensuring everything launched smoothly. What made it all the harder was knowing that, technically, she didn't actually have to do any of it. If she relaxed control, Wade could take over and probably do a better job than anything she could manage. Healthy as her ego was, Tori still held the intelligence of the villain known as Dr. Mechanical in high regard. The only villain she arguably respected more was Ivan, her mentor, and that was for factors other than genius. All she had to do was step back, and all her anxieties would be gone. No trying on clothes she looked out of place wearing, no parading in front of cameras with a smile that felt unnatural, no playing good little worker bee with other office drones. She could go on developing new tech for Wade, never having to leave her comfort zone. And if she did, Tori knew that was all she would ever be. A footnote in someone else's story, a cog in another machine. Maybe a big cog, perhaps one day even a vital one, but she would never be the one in control. Reaching her dreams would become a matter of what she was allowed to do, rather than what she was capable of. Tori's ambitions went far, far further than the current self-defense line and one metasuit. What she wanted would demand doing exactly the tasks set before her. Raise money, lead employees, generate interest in new products, all essential skills for running a business. With a resigned sigh, Tori picked over Beverly's newest offerings. One was a dark suit, like many Tori had already seen, but this one gave her pause. The buttons along the jacket and the seams of the skirt were both colored a dark red, like spilled Merlot. Donning the color scheme of her villain identity as a civilian was a little bold, but black and red was a fairly classic combination. They'd even walked past one store with a bunch of shoes that were red on the bottom, at which point Beverly had giggled uncontrollably and urged Tori to go in and check the prices. Setting her newest selection on the rack, Tori began the process of shedding and donning yet another set of clothing. Through the curtain behind her, she could hear Beverly complimenting the fit of the purple blouse on Chloe, who apparently had just gone ahead and changed rather than zoning out for several minutes. Tori sped up her process. Deciding if the only way out was through, she'd be better off getting it done. After all, the store was a physical building that could only hold a limited amount of merchandise. Eventually, even Beverly would run out of new outfits for Tori to try. She hoped. Beth shrieked, jerking her hand quickly away. The spray of cold water from the slapping fin fell short, failing to spritz her fingers as the small shark swam away, only to come back seconds later. When it veered toward the edge of the touch tank where her father stood, however, it turned around instantly, refusing to swim back in that direction. Ivan's daughter didn't notice the odd behaviors. She was too enamored by the array of sea creatures laid out before her. Even on her earliest visits, Beth had always loved the touch tank, getting to interact with the beings usually sealed away behind glass. The aquarium had long been one of their favorite places, and with the weather taking a turn for the pleasant, Ivan and his daughter had a few other visitors to deal with. He certainly didn't miss them, though Ivan would have minded one other addition to their outing. His son, Rick, had loved the aquarium as well, fascinated by the differences in such a wide array of organisms. No matter how much Ivan assured himself that pulling back was normal for teens, the distance between them had undeniably grown when Rick learned the truth about his father. Discovering that he was the son of Fornax, a villain of legendary stature believed to have died, was hard enough. Actually seeing Fornax go to work during the Rex Run invasion, Ivan understood fully why his son was pulling away. That didn't stop it from hurting, however. Happy laughter rang out as Beth ran her hands across a stingray, and Ivan forced himself to focus on the positive. For now, his daughter still only knew him as Ivan. He realized the day would come when she too learned the truth, and probably sooner rather than later if Rick was any indication. So Ivan made sure to savor these moments, the simple time spent together. When she learned the truth, that knowledge would change things, which made the time he had left all the more precious. There was no guild business on his books. Work was confined to the weekdays, and even Tori, his one-time apprentice and arguably the most chaotic element in his life, was out on some shopping trip. Ivan was looking forward to a nice, peaceful day of normalcy with his daughter. "That is disgusting." Ellie's nose crinkled as she watched Kyle lift the overly laden pretzel above his mouth, catching the errant drips of chocolate sauce that fell away. His face blurred momentarily, and suddenly several bites were missing, leaving a more manageable hunk to hold. "Have to say, kinda with Ellie here," Austin agreed. "I know you need the calories and all, but even the clerk was looking concerned by the end." Chewing rapidly, Kyle gulped down the mound of goop in his mouth, dabbing the edges of his mouth with a napkin, which, if anything, only made the smears of chocolate worse. "Hey, they made it pay by the topping, and I handed over my money. If they wanted a per pretzel limit, they'd have one." "Next time we come in, they might." Ellie glanced across the outdoor dining area to where a clerk from the pretzel stand was doing an awful job of covertly pointing at Kyle while miming how large the order was. Upon first arriving in Ridge City, she'd have been worried that perhaps the vendor figured out who they were. Thankfully, outside a slip-up with Tori, Beverly, and Chloe in the beginning, the team had done a good job keeping their identities covert. Not that any of them actually needed it. The only people they had to protect were all living on Vomisa, an island laboratory fortress operated by Professor Quantum. Still, maintaining a civilian cover identity was part of the parameters they'd been given, so failing to do so would have consequences. There was a time when the notion of displeasing Professor Quantum would have sent shivers down Ellie's spine. But that time was before she saw a bony hand sticking out of her friend's back, a killing blow that had been meant for her. Experience in the field had proven that there were much scarier things than even that cranky old bastard. Her eyes shifted to Austin, who was cutting up his own cinnamon sugar pretzel using a plastic knife and fork. It was mind-boggling that the two men who shared part of their superhero moniker and even a certain amount of genetics could be so fundamentally different. Given his natural gifts, it would have been entirely understandable for Austin to turn out egotistical and self-centered. The looks, the strength, the pedigree. He could have sailed through life. Instead, he dove into the murkiest waters he could find, diving deep and dragging up whoever was in reach. To Austin, having a boat was worthless, unless he filled it with people who couldn't swim. "Okay, I think we have to go to a bathroom," Austin said, eyes going wide as he caught sight of Kyle. "You are covered in chocolate and caramel sauce. What happened?" "Structural integrity gave out. It was a miracle I caught it all." Opening his quantum utility device disguised as a phone, Kyle turned on the camera app and flipped it to front-facing. "Wow. All right. I can admit that in my hurry I might not have paid as much attention to manners as I should have." He grabbed a single paper napkin from a canister on the table and dabbed at his cheek. It accomplished less than nothing, only managing to smear the gunk further about. "Fine, I'll run to the bathroom and wash my face. You two try not to get into any trouble while I'm gone." "Unless you're planning to hunker down and take a whole staycation in there, I think we'll manage," Ellie replied. Unlike the limited space of a single universe, dimensional space was colorful. Vibrant greens, lustrous golds, shimmering reds, and dangerous blues. Colors and spectrums the human eye could not perceive, nor the mortal mind comprehend. Colors of truth, of life, of infinity, of emptiness. Colors that painted the tapestry of existence itself. Then, in one particular corner of the multiverse, a color began to grow. It was many hues, yet it was one. Destruction and creation, the endless cycle of rebirth, a nigh endless torrent of finality and potential. A dimensional nova was erupting. Entire universes were altered instantly, whole realms fractured and fused together in the span of a heartbeat. Beings who'd lived lifetimes with no knowledge of planes beyond their own were suddenly thrust into tribulation. Conflicts arose, as did alliances, new potentials born from the ashes of lives forever altered. Whether what arose would be greater than what was lost was for time to tell. Other realms received a lighter touch, a shift in the foundations, tweaks that would ripple out for generations to come. Some were barely affected, despite the proximity to the nova, washed over and helped to ripen, for they were not yet able to withstand its true energies. However, even in the heart of the eruption, some realms remained unaltered. The nova's energy collided with these universes just as it did others. However, they crashed off barriers of gleaming light. These iterations were fully manifested, unwilling to allow meddling from outside forces. The power of the light was too strong. Even against the might of a dimensional nova, they would not break. Nevertheless, a toll was taken. The constant barrage bore down on the light-covered realms, twisting and snapping, biting and tearing. Destroying the light barriers was beyond the nova, but it could deal wounds, brief rips that entities from other realms might be forced through. As the nova erupted, its color deepened, seeping into multitude of worlds. Chapter 3. Tori had just finished putting her own clothes back on when they saw the flash. Through the shop's windows, they had an excellent view of the multicolored flare that washed down from the sky. It was a tapestry of hues Tori could barely perceive, gone in a blink, yet impossible to forget. The sight alone took her breath away, leading to an extra bit of silence that made it all the easier to hear what came next. Screaming. People were screaming, and now that she looked closer, Tori could see bodies starting to run. That would be bad enough on its own, but this was an outlet mall for Ridge City, home of the Alliance of Heroic Champions. The population here experienced more meta-encounters than nearly anywhere else in the world. They weren't the type to get spooked by a simple flash from the sky. A new shriek jerked Tori's attention to the other side of the store. One of the clerks was yelling and pointing through the window where there was a something lurking. Mottled green-brown flesh wound around its sizable body, which landed somewhere around a mastiff or a pony. Two large three-toed legs kept it grounded as four smaller arms raked through the air. All 7 digits ended in serrated claws. Its mouth was vast, with 2 pronounced fangs jutting forward and rows of sharp teeth behind. Oddest of all was about the mouth, where a gelatinous sac of green and red pulsed irregularly. No eyes, no ears, only the mouth and the sac. "What in the smoldering hell is that thing?" Beverly whispered, sidling up to Tori's right. Chloe was edging closer as well, visibly more panicked than their more fashionable roommate. Whether it heard the question or was simply a fan of perfect timing, the creature opened up its mouth and let out an unexpectedly high-pitched "Zwark! Zwark! Zwark!" "Guess we're going with Zwarks," Tori suggested. Beverly allowed herself a small chuckle. Sometimes the simple solutions are shit. Without warning, the Zwark they'd been watching used those long legs to leap forward and pounce on the nearest prey it spotted. Powerful jaws shattered the legs, ensuring escape was impossible, while its multiple sets of claws cut through the arms and torso. Despite the victory, the Zwark released a guttural squeal. Evidently, mannequins didn't make for very good eating. The chaos was increasing as Tori spotted more Zwarks wandering into view, people running away from wherever they were. Despite the first one's comical blunder, Tori couldn't help noticing the bloodstains on several Zwark mouths and claws. Given the chance, these things would devour them, so that was an opportunity Tori was determined not to provide. "Please tell me one of you has a plan." Chloe was almost standing on top of them, a reasonable reaction, as she was the only one of the 3 without overt combat abilities. Absolutely. It's called Let's Find Somewhere Private and Get the Fuck Out of Here, 'cause it's only a hop, skip, and all that away. You couldn't finish out this saying. The word jump was less than what you used. Beverly paused as the nearest Zwark turned back toward their shop, eliciting several shrieks from the other customers. She stared at them. The innocent civilians that didn't have abilities to fight with, or a friend who could teleport them to safety. Despite her ending up working with a guild of villains, Beverly still came from a family with a strong emphasis on duty and service. Tori saw the indecision flicker on her friend's face, while she was feeling far more certain. Come on! We're only a few miles from the AHC headquarters. Whatever this is, I'm sure the Capes are already responding, which is all the more reason why we should be gone. Did you forget what's in that van? Even as she spoke, Tori could see the wheels in her friend's head turning, weighing the argument against the sight of looming danger and imminent loss of life. When Chloe piped up, Tori felt a sense of cheer, right up until she realized what their third roommate was saying. I'm not sure how soon they'll be able to make it. While they'd been talking, Chloe had pulled out her phone and cycled between the news and social media. Monsters are appearing all over the world. Superheroes are already out doing what they can, but there's only so many of them. I think we might be on our own. So far as I'm concerned, that seals it. If Capes won't contain this, we don't want to get involved. Tori set her chin and crossed her arms, refusing to budge. This was Cape work, pure and simple. There was absolutely no reason for known villains to get involved. Slowly, a smile appeared on Beverly's face, understated yet dangerous. Weren't you the one who wanted to give her newest suit a field test? Combat against drones is one thing, and here's a chance to test it against living, reacting opponents. Ones that nobody will be upset with you for battering and splattering to your heart's content. So maybe there was almost no reason for known villains to get involved? And what are you getting out of it? Tori poked. Even if Beverly could justify this instance, it was risky to forget just which side of the line they lived on. The Capes certainly wouldn't. Beverly's eyes flashed green for a moment, an echo of the power dwelling within her. I get training and catharsis. Plus, I want to see if I can pop one of those heads. The smart call was to go. Even without Chloe, Tori could escape easily enough. Her fire form was handy for that sort of thing. But if she did, Tori knew all she'd be able to think about was the fight going on here. Memories of a foul-mouthed friend with a hole punched in his guts bubbled up, her brain helpfully inserting pictures of a bisected Beverly or a Chloe without her throat. The smart call was to go, but the right call was to stay. Tori's right call, at least. Fine. Let's get to the dressing rooms and then hop to the van. Chloe, after that, you should hop home. Glancing out the window, Tori saw a Zwark leap toward a fleeing couple, easily clearing the smoothie stand they'd run behind. It landed with a heavy crash and let out a keening cry of what she presumed to be triumph. This has got all the makings of a first-class shit show. The power stormed through his veins, surging along his spine, burning in his brain. A power that drowned out the world around him, the insignificant buzzing of mortal lives as they bloomed and burst in their minuscule durations. All that existed, all that mattered, was the power within. The ability to unmake, to tear apart, to rip down this horrific prison known as existence and return the universe to it. Dad? Beth's hand touched his own, and Ivan's awareness took an icy, unyielding control over the sudden surge of power bursting forth. An absolute will slammed the surplus energy into compliance, bearing it down with the rest of the might he so rarely needed. Seconds later, he opened his eyes, squeezing his daughter's hand gently. Sorry about that. I got lightheaded for a moment. How about we go get a snack? I saw a shop not far back with dolphin pops. As long as you're okay. We can sit for a while if you need to rest first. She hugged his arm, and Ivan pushed down the last of the additional energy. Any energy or entity that viewed his daughter as an expendable piece of existence would forever find Ivan Gerhardt blocking its path. Still, the spike of energy could have only one explanation. Although it had been a long while since Ivan experienced the eruption of a dimensional nova in another realm, its effects were unforgettable. Every meta with transcendence-based abilities was going to experience a huge uptick in their powers as the dimensional barriers weakened. Worse, there was likely to be an influx of extra-dimensional beings, creatures swept up in the currents of the eruption when their own realms were obliterated. Since he was with Beth, she would be safe, but there was still his son to account for. Ivan took out his phone and quickly dispatched a series of texts, one to the guild requesting protective details, and one to Janet, so she had some idea of what was happening. The news would likely already be reporting the monsters, but they wouldn't have any idea of what to truly expect. Putting an arm around Beth and hugging her back, Ivan listened closely for the approach of any monsters that might seek to interrupt their afternoon together. Should one appear, it would learn very quickly that no matter how appetizing this new world might look, it had its fair share of predators, some of whom masqueraded as easy prey.
Zwark!
The monster lunged, successfully wrapping its teeth around the arm, even as its front fangs hit nothing but air. Instantly, it tried to chew off its prize, soon realizing something was wrong. Beneath the limb's fur were a set of tough scales that resisted its efforts to crack into them. Stranger still, the claws on the fingers sank into the flesh of its mouth and tightened, as if gripping its head from the inside.
Let's try this again,
Medley growled. Now that he had a proper hold of the creature, he reared back and slammed a fist into the gelatinous sac making up most of its head. The first attempts had bounced off as the target proved both malleable and durable, able to disperse most of the force. Yanking the head around, Medley positioned it so his free fist would smash the sack down into the top of its mouth, effectively as much a squeeze as a punch. His successful efforts resulted in a burst of goo exploding all over his fur, the nearby merchandise, and several civilians cowering in the corner. Muffled screams accompanied the display, though no one risked letting the volume climb too high. Huddled in the back of the electronics store, Cybergeek hurriedly cycled through his options. They needed a path to transport people out, which meant they needed something to shield them from monsters and debris, and ideally a solution that could cover a large area. As he puzzled over what to use, Cold Shoulder was reinforcing the windows with huge chunks of ice, which had already done in one startled monster when it tried and failed to bash through. Hat-Trick was making rounds, checking on the civilians and scoping the situation outside. As for Medley, he'd finished the monster that snuck inside. Now they just had to hope there wouldn't be more. The situation was rough, but not unmanageable. Cybergeek had faith they'd be able to fight their way out as a team, likely even protecting the civilians they reached. What bothered him was how many they'd never get to. Just from his glances outside, Cybergeek could see several of the monsters prowling about. They needed to be out there helping, but not if it cost the lives of those already trusting them. Making his choice, Cybergeek was awash in a sea of blue numbers as his power activated, producing an item from one of the many video games running in the computers embedded in his skull. It was a power he still couldn't believe was his to wield, an endless array of options to any dilemma, yet today he could only hope it would be enough. Because if it wasn't, people were going to die, possibly his team members among them. Tachyon grabbed the couple behind the smoothie stand only seconds before they would have been crushed by the wide feet and deadly claws. He raced them to the parking lot, then ran back in without a word. There was no time for banter or quips, no chance to offer a kind word. All he could do was keep going. Already it hadn't been enough. When Kyle emerged from the restroom, he found a creature yelling, "Zwark!" chewing on an arm. Where it had gotten the appendage, he had no idea. The sight was so shocking and visceral that Kyle moved on instinct, smashing his fist into the bulbous sack on its head at high speeds. Unfortunately, it proved more durable than appearances suggested, his flurry at first doing little more than agitating his foe. After a few moments of thought, Kyle switched gears. Stripping down to the tachyonic suit, often kept under his clothes, he pulled on his mask and got to work doing what only he could, moving people out of harm's way. Aged Quantum and Plasmodia had more than enough stopping power. What they needed was a battlefield cleared of civilians. For what felt like the billionth time since his passing, Tachyonic missed Presto's presence in the field. He'd always known the man was talented, but fighting without his help these past months had thrown into sharp focus just how much Presto had added. Thanks to his spatial relocation ability, Presto teleported innocents and foes alike, rearranging battlefields to keep things straightforward for his team. Without that power, and the mind to use it well, things had gotten much messier. As he ran, Tachyon saw the places where he was already too late. Sometimes it was a streak of blood along cobblestone, or a few fingers floating in the fountain. Other times it was worse. One particularly horrific sight came when he rounded a corner and found one of the creatures chewing on what had once almost certainly been a person, not that it was recognizable any longer. Every time, he felt the same question flare in his chest. Could Presto have saved them? Could Tachyon have managed, if only he was faster? Once he'd thought of himself as among the top tier of super speeders, even if he needed the suit's help to reach his full potential. Months at the AHC had given Tachyon a new perspective. He was fast, it was true, but others were so much faster. It was a realization that reignited his passion for training, effort that was bearing fruit as he grabbed a rightfully screaming toddler away from a set of snapping jaws, rushing the child and her parents out to the parking lot. Despite his intent to run back in, Tachyon paused, gulping down a series of breaths. Maintaining a modest speed didn't drain him too much. However, racing at his maximum was another story. Tachyon typically only hit his peak for short bursts. Today, however, every second mattered.
Thank you.
The words were poorly formed, as the child was still clearly learning to talk, but they were still intelligible. Anytime, Tachyon replied, flashing his best "it'll all be okay" grin. That's what superheroes are for. As he looked at the child and her family, Tachyon's eyes turned to the series of canyons near the outlet malls. He'd glimpsed it many times already, although always when he was moving at super speed. It was a phase where the world slowed down, everything running at reduced speed. Normally, that was helpful. Yet there were theoretical drawbacks. For example, if a group of creatures with brown coloration were running along a surface with a similar hue, say a rocky canyon, they might blend in entirely when slowed down. Whereas, when standing there in normal time, Tachyon could realize there were a lot more of the monsters than anyone realized, and they were all stampeding directly for the outlet mall. Chapter 4. Teleporting into the van was simple. Getting out was another matter. Chloe's ability to make idioms into actual rules of the universe was potent enough that it genuinely unnerved Tori. The power to overwrite reality itself was nothing to trifle with. Still, she was bound by the rules of each saying, only able to use their power when she could see how such a phrase would work in reality. For her teleportation phrase, Chloe used, "It's just a hop, skip, and a jump away," which therefore required all three actions. Huddling together in a spare dressing room, they'd only just barely managed all three movements. Crammed into the van, there was simply not enough room. Since it was their sole option other than driving away, a notion Tori was still quite keen on, Beverly and Tori donned their costumes in the back of Chloe's borrowed van. Beverly was faster, swapping her dress for an enchanted set of armor that changed shape along with her. Naturally green, the cut of the chest piece and use of long tassets rather than pants were small nods to the costume of her own mentor, a cultured tower of muscle named Thuggernaut. As for Tori, she locked each piece of her armor on one by one. Like her last model, this one had an emergency exit and entry function, but the armor had to be assembled first. Complex as the donning process was, Tori knew the armor inside and out, as she'd crafted every inch of it. In a span of mere minutes, the last of Tori vanished as the helmet was locked into place and her form turned to living fire. Where once had been Beverly and Tori, there now stood Bahamut and Hephaestus. Or rather, there they crouched, as both were still crammed into the back of the van. From the front seat, Chloe let out an appreciative whistle. "Your new suit looks fantastic. It's a lot less pointy than the last one." "Improved aesthetics are only the start," Hephaestus replied. The voice that came out was warped through a digital scrambler and slightly lowered in tone. As with the male name, this helped Capes make an incorrect assumption about the gender of Hephaestus, one more layer of protection to keep Tori's truth from being uncovered. Despite her misgivings about doing what was clearly Cape work, Hephaestus couldn't deny a thrill of excitement at having the newly designed systems fully booted. It didn't matter why she was in this mess. The fact was that fate had gifted her living targets to test herself against. She burned to see her new system fully put through its proper paces. Propping open the back of the van, Hephaestus looked back over to Bahamut, who was hurriedly giving directions to Chloe. "As soon as we're out, you should teleport somewhere safe." "Good idea," Chloe agreed. "Where should I go? We have no idea if our apartment is being attacked, too." Those words pulled Hephaestus up short. Shit! She was right. The news told them that monsters were appearing all over. There was no way of knowing if Chloe would actually be skip and jumping out of a frying pan and into enormous salivating jaws. In her shoes, Tori would go to the guild's headquarters or Ivan's place, places that any wayward monster would swiftly regret their decision to invade. For better or worse, Chloe had avoided joining both the Capes and the villains, meaning she hadn't been inside either base. Even if her power would let her get there, upon arrival at either locale, she'd be marked as an intruder, opening up all the more trouble. Arguably, the best place for Chloe might be the danger she was already informed of. The Zwarks didn't seem especially dangerous for a metahuman, and their numbers were thin. With Hephaestus and Bahamut to keep an eye on her, this might be the safest of her options. Bahamut clearly reached a similar conclusion. Damn it, didn't think of that. Good catch, Chloe. All